Good afternoon. It really is an amazing opportunity to participate in this forum. I want to thank Mark and the Social Service Review, AASW, SWR. I'd like to thank my collaborator, Mary Bunn, who I consider a real practitioner, SSA-trained, emerging scholar in our doctoral program with 15 years of practice experience in international social work, working with refugees and torture victims. I also will just observe that my training is in the interpersonal practice sequence at Michigan, where I had healthy exposure to Roland Warren and certainly to Rothman. So that may, in fact, influence some of my remarks today. But I'd also like to thank all of you who are still in the room. There are a great many people of you out there whom I respect, and I really look forward to whatever reactions you might have to the remarks we make today. The way that we are trying to deal with the time constraints that we have in front of us is to, first of all, divide our effort into 3 parts. The first part, which Mary will go through, is really trying to deal with some of these history and definitional issues relevant to direct social work practice. We're next going to take a look at some data that, in fact, I don't think has ever been presented before. Data related to what are the specific tasks of direct practice social work, and what is the knowledge base and research that informs the work that social workers do. And finally, we'll try to do what Mark asked and project forward what these findings may mean for the future of direct social work practice. Okay, sorry. I thought this, we may have gotten the wrong slide in here, but basically the take-home message is that when we think about professions, we think of them, all professions, as defined by the tasks that they do and the knowledge base that informs those tasks. We are thinking about social work profession, and really this is true of all professions, as essentially vertically integrated. Direct practice, administration, community organization, and policy. And implicit in what we're talking about is that it's really not possible to talk about one method without considering the others. Finally, the results of our presentation will bring forward some realities of direct practice social work, which first and foremost, the evidence shows mental health and child welfare are major practice areas, but the range of practice areas that we're operating in now is really quite numerous and growing and changing. The other issue that our data show is that, depending on what data you look at, 1/2 to 2/3 of our graduates report direct practice as their primary method. So that statistic in particular seems to be a bit contested if you listen to the presentations today, and I hope we can talk about that. And the data we have, all CSWE data are showing that micro and macro practice, the students we train in those 2 areas are growing at a comparable rate. We are in a growth industry in social work. Practitioners, in terms of the data that they use, report both conceptual and instrumental knowledge. And when you look at what knowledge practitioners report that they use, they really cite the value of both conceptual as well as instrumental knowledge. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mary to talk a bit about definition and history, and we'll try to stay on time.
Thank you. My name's Mary Bunn, and I'm very happy to be here today. As Jeanne mentioned, this first part of our presentation will provide a context for our discussion in terms of the theoretical orientation that we're using, conceptualizations, and definitions to shape our ideas about the state of direct practice. In terms of theory of professions, this special symposium, as was discussed earlier, was organized in conjunction with the 100th anniversary of the Flexner speech, one that's well known, notorious perhaps in social work. For our purposes today, we found it more useful to draw on Abbott's work in institutional theory of profession. And for this presentation, 4 key ideas contained in that theory. The first point of orientation is that professions are defined by the societal problems they seek to address. And for social work, we define that as solving issues of social justice, which we've just heard needs further clarification and operationalization in order to be meaningful. The second idea is that professions develop in an organizational field and occupy and control certain domains of activity, and that these are likely to shift and change over time. The third idea is that professions are strengthened by differentiation within the profession, which we refer to as vertical integration. This includes various degrees offered within the field of social work, or perhaps various ways and roles and methods that social workers may be engaged in various practice areas. And the last idea is that professions gain legitimacy through codes of ethics, accreditation, and licensure processes. We wanted to note that, which has been noted already so far, that this conference has conceptualized direct practice as a method. However, we use this graphic as a way to highlight the fact that there are many entry points into thinking about and conceptualizing direct practice, including by population, practice area, and even setting of practice. And we may, for our future work on this presentation, want to update this graphic that we used for today to include emerging areas of social work direct practice, such as criminal justice, violence prevention, international social work, human rights, training and supervising community members and paraprofessionals. Far from the presumption of direct practice as a narrow concept definition, we are thinking about it as a multifaceted method that inherently requires engagement at multiple levels, including micro, meso, and macro. And we find some resonance with this idea in the NASW definition of direct practice, which we're sharing today. So now we want to shift and look ever so briefly at the history of social work direct practice and highlight some key contributions that have had an enduring effect on how we approach services. Before doing so, as our co-presenters have done, we want to acknowledge the impossibility of this task in terms of doing any justice to the topic in this extremely short presentation. And I want to also indicate that we're departing very briefly in this section from the more integrative conceptualization of direct practice that we've just discussed and focus on social work authors fitting within a more narrow conceptualization of direct practice. For the purpose of this presentation, we've divided the approximately 100-year history of social work direct practice into 3 major waves, which we have chosen to call early notions of helping, refining direct practice, and increasing effectiveness of practice. So assuming that you can even read the slide, given how dense it is, we want to highlight just a few ideas for today. The first is the early work of Mary Richmond, who's been mentioned several times today, and who we see as the pioneer of vertical integration in direct practice with her retail wholesale method, which highlights the need for engagement at the individual and macro level and the ways in which they inform and enrich each other. Second, looking across the initial history of direct practice contributions, we see that there's an ebb and flow in terms of the extent to which this integrated view, this more holistic, multifaceted view of direct practice is reflected versus a more narrow and specialized formulation. The last point we want to make about the history of direct practice for today is that the most recent wave we see ourselves in is one that's focused on increasing the effectiveness of direct practice. And this has certainly changed. It has had important contributions in terms of the way and the rigor we bring to the measurement of interventions, the role of research methods in delivering services, and also acknowledge that there are ways in which our focus on effectiveness in direct practice and direct practice research has drawn attention away from other important areas of focus, such as process and mechanisms of change and systems level outcomes. What's also not included in this slide is what we see as emerging areas of direct practice. Some of those surely would include a focus on anti-oppressive practice models, trauma-informed care, and even global direct practice, which naturally reinforce the need to be engaged at both the individual and the structural level. I want to make sure. Oop. I see. I'm sorry that it. Yes, I see our history slide got split up into 3 different slides. In terms of social work's unique contribution, which we've been asked to comment on for the presentation and for this special symposium, it's our point of view that the contribution of these and other direct social work scholars, thinkers, and practitioners across history have resulted in a core set of values, principles, and techniques that are readily apparent across all methods of social work practice. These include the importance of relationships, self-determination, strengths-based orientation, among others. And today we've seen our co-presenter echo these similar themes and principles. So in order to respond to the enormous question posed by this special symposium, what is the state of direct practice today? Like good researchers, we were interested to see if there were data to help us answer this question, which were surprisingly few and difficult to find. I'm going to turn this back over to my co-presenter now, who will discuss CSWE data on trends in master's level training, an ongoing survey of master's level alumni, and a survey of practitioners. After reviewing the data, one of our primary observations, which Dr. Marsh will discuss, was that a number of the prevailing perceptions and myths about direct practice were not reflected in the data.
Thank you, Mary. So this next section of our presentation is really meant to address a kind of subtext of the presentation, which is that it's clear that we have very strong opinions and perspectives on direct practice social work, but we have much less data on the subject. So we identified some data that we'll present to you, and it will be valuable to take a look at that. First of all, the CSWE data. This comes from the annual survey that every school fills out, and on the survey, schools are asked to talk about what concentrations do they offer. So we analyze this data in terms of first, total student enrollment. That's the y-axis, and we divided it into micro, the dotted trend line, macro concentrations, the square trend line, and we kept the generalist, advanced generalist as a third area that might perhaps be the most integrated of our concentrations. And what you see over in terms of the trend over time is that this shows that over time, about 1/3 of our graduates are in concentrations, macro practice concentrations, and about 2/3 are in direct practice concentrations. If we drill down into what does that mean in terms of what our graduates do every day when they take their first job, we had access to 5 years of alumni data from graduates of the School of Social Service Administration who were asked, and the response rate was actually quite good, what is your primary method when in your new job? And what we found was that 45% of these social workers cited direct practice. The other 10% cited research, which was interesting, is the second largest. The next was, I can't exactly see that, management. The next after that was planning, policy, and program implementation, applying, formulating, and revising policies, management, external relations, and it goes down from there. So, 4 minutes, okay. So if we take those 45% and we divide them, we ask them what is the second, we really have to look at this slide for Jennifer. We asked them, so you're a direct service practitioner, what is your second most significant task? And the second most significant task cited, at least the perception of these graduates, is that advocacy is a very important aspect of what they're involved in, as well as management and a set of other macro practice-related skills, which really points to the rich set of skills that our graduates are calling upon. So quickly moving to this idea, the question really was, what in our knowledge base is really useful to practitioners? We talk a lot about the practice research gap in social work, and to address this question, we again went to social work practitioners and asked them, is the research in social work useful to you, and what kind is useful? And to summarize that very quickly, the results were quite consistent with the knowledge utilization literature that shows that yes, so that shows us that that in fact most practitioners really appreciate research that is produced, and they use research. Not all. The most vivid response we got was that social work research is like chewing on cardboard. But for the most part, our findings show that researchers have both a theoretical and conceptual use of knowledge, as well as more instrumental use that you might consider evidence-based practice to fall into. The second piece of information that we looked at in terms of what social workers use was a citation count study by Hodge, Lacasse, and Benson of 2011, where they looked at the 100 most frequently cited articles. Some of you in the audience may have been in that, no doubt were. I know Mark was. And what those data show are the same thing. We categorize those articles into conceptual and instrumental knowledge, and basically found that social work, those social work, well-used social work articles are both research and more conceptual, and use several different research methods. I just show you this graph for those of you who are concerned about the rigor of social work research. This comes from the work of Bruce Thayer with the number of increasing randomized controlled trials that are being done in social work over time. Let me quickly go to conceptualizations. 1 minute. Okay. So if you accept the fact that social work is both vertically and horizontally integrated, what does that mean that we should do? Well, our suggestion is the need to strengthen social work training across all concentrations and practice levels. Further, to open our programs, this is being done now, to new pipeline programs, and to be open to competing for preparing students to several different new domains of practice. Further, if professions are defined by the tasks they do, we need to plan for direct practice social work careers that include the highly diversified tasks and prepare our students accordingly. And finally, if the most useful knowledge derives from practice, we really need to better understand practice-relevant research, identify models of research that engage practitioners. A number of these models are being used and developed now. Practice-based research networks, embedded researchers in social service organizations. And at this conference, we identified a wonderful roundtable by Para, Sharp, Spencer, and Kulkami, who in fact are looking at strategies that would engage practitioners more fully. Now, we're not naive to the fact that especially after hearing the passion with which we discuss these issues in our profession, we know that these implications are challenging. We know that we have struggles ahead, but we're optimistic in the sense that we feel that we can learn from the next generation of social work scholars. This struggle is real. So thank you very much.
Well, first, I would like to acknowledge the land we stand on in the spirit that we started this SOAR conference with the grant entry and Dr. Linda Smith's talk. We stand on the land of original land of Piscataway people. I'm here as a visitor from what is now known as Canada. It's important for me to recognize where we are and where we come from. So we claim our rightful knowledge for what we do as who we are and social workers and social work researchers. I come from Japan, and I look kind of young, but in 1986, I started my journey as a social worker in social work undergraduate school in Japan. Some of my texts included Richmond's social diagnosis, Carol Germain, Larry Schwartz, Charles Gervin. I also read some of the stuff with Alex Kitterman, and led me to study group work in master's program in Japan. However, in my field practicum, I was told that I should forget everything I learned in school and just focus on what I can learn from the field. So this was my introduction to what I was going to find about the division between the research and the field, or the research and the practice, and also the expert model of social work knowledge and the reality of what may be going on elsewhere. So I will come back to that point. I was really fascinated by reading the PowerPoints that Jeanne and Mary provided for me earlier, and I'm going to respond to that first and come back to some of these points later. So overall pictures I got was more questions than the answers. So what's really the role of direct social worker? And so to the extent that also this is a larger question, what is really a direct social work? And do we really have a sufficient knowledge to support this changing endeavor, what we know as social work profession? If not, what can we do? Do we need different tools for knowledge creation? And one of the implications they had put forward was, if vertical and horizontal integration strengthen the profession, what can we do? Examine EPAS from CSW would be one of them. And guidance can be found in probably some of the traditional practices, including indigenous training, healing practices, and also social work practices in other countries. I find Janet Finn's just practice to be very helpful in integrating micro to macro practices really well, from building on our social work knowledge base, but also bringing in many different knowledge bases from the global south as well. For example, many communities have unit of practice, unit of knowledge, unit of analysis as community, not individual. So we start from community, and from smaller unit, maybe families or individuals. Larger unit may be societies and so forth, but we don't start from individuals. So that itself would be a very different way of looking at the world. If professions are defined by the tasks they do, then we may not be defining our professions really well. And we need to really critically reflect on social work education. And really, Jeanne and Mary's paper really call us to wake up and really do self-reflection. So do we really know what we are doing? Continue to challenge a century-old and force the dichotomy of micro and macro divide, which has been talked about already. And also more teaching materials to address that. And if the most useful knowledge derives from the practice, and if we are not capturing that well, even though with our best efforts so far, what can we do? Broaden tools to capture our knowledge, stories, art. There are many ways to capture our knowledge. We may not be counting them as evidence. Can we broaden the evidence? We examine the nature of our knowledge. Master knowledge, common sense. Common sense is tricky because that comes under our skin. We need to take that out and re-examine. It's really important to be challenged in our common sense. And if most effective dissemination source is not the journal article, this is really tricky too. And Linda Smith had some guidance also in our the opening plenary during the SWOR conference. And it's urgent, she calls us. Also, so this is Linda Smith's quote from her book, that globalization of knowledge and Western culture constantly reaffirms the West view of itself as the center of legitimate knowledge, the arbitrary of what counts as knowledge and the source of civilized knowledge. This is what we also hold. And I'm not immune to this. I'm also acculturated into this, assimilated into this. So I can't say I'm free from this either. And it's really urgent to look to different ways of knowing, decolonizing our knowledge base. And this is a process. We can't do it overnight. Documenting local and indigenous knowledges. So this is very important. And urgency of theory is also called for by Bell Hooks. I came to theory because I was hurting. The pain within me was so intense that I could not go on living. I came to theory desperate, wanting to comprehend, to grasp what was happening around and within me. Most importantly, I wanted to make the hurt go away. I saw in theory a location for healing. So theory is not this ground thing. Theory can be different kinds of way, systematic way of understanding the phenomena or experience, human experience. And theories may not be accounting for what people are going through. We need more relevant theory. We need more relevant knowledges out there. And maybe social work evidence that we know may not be counting for that. Actually, I see many social work students when I teach social justice research class who come out of evidence-based research, evidence-based practice class, saying that, I don't like research anymore. I don't like research, and I need to spend 3 weeks, 4 weeks with them before I can really talk about research, because they feel that evidence was randomized controlled trials. And no, it's not that. There are many different kinds of knowledges, evidence, but it's really need to massage that. And we don't want to stuck in that. We don't want to be stuck in that place. Personal relevance for me is that I also was well assimilated into that way of thinking. So when I was met with my grandfather at my grandmother's funeral, he was wailing and the mourning my grandmother's passing. And he was like obviously so distressed. And when I looked at him flying to Japan, oh my God, like that's unlike Japanese men, is what I thought. That was my first thinking. And that was shocking to me because later I thought, oh my God, I started thinking like white people too. So I thought through the whiteness, gaze through white eyes to think about my people because I was so used to it in classrooms. Oh, you're asking me about Japanese people. Let me tell you, these are Japanese people. So that was my way of survival in classrooms where my way of knowing or my way of being were not legitimized. So after a few years of doing it so well that I didn't know how to know my own people, my family member. So common sense needs to be challenged. This is some of the things I do, theater projects that also led to helping to create policy, human rights policy in a provincial level. However, these things don't count in a reward system, in the promotion annual. Like, oh, that's nice, that's cute. I mean, it's a little more than that, but it's not a journal article until it's written down. It's not, website doesn't really, it's not number. So federal grants, peer-reviewed articles, those are things that are measurable. It's not about faculty of social work, or it's a dean, or it's not like that. It's a huge academic industrial complex that have the grasp on this. So, how can we push back so that we can create a knowledge that matters, the knowledge that is relevant to us, that's to practice, that's to people, so that social work practice can stay relevant and we can be in this field. And inherent dilemma in social work is that, it's a charity to enterprise. You have Michael Rush here. And we are in enterprise. We need to act in the enterprise. And so there's an inherent dilemma. So it's a within agency profession, social work, and there's a state always having this, how much paycheck how much can we resist? And social work also have to have standard by professionalizing its profession. It's our endeavor. There's a create helper and helpee that also creates us versus them. So those are fundamental dilemmas we operate from. So then should we deprofessionalize? And so those are the debates that we also had 100 years ago between Jane Addams and Mayor Richmond. Should we revisit that kind of debate? And this is global definition of social work profession. I highlighted things that matter to me, and I think to this discussion, social justice, which I understand needs to be problematized and discussed further. Human rights, respect for diversities, not just lip service, but diverse knowledges. And can we really unsettle our knowledge base and listen to broaden things that we don't know? Indigenous knowledges. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes before we bring up the final panel. So go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, and thank you to the panel. I had a few comments I wanted to make. First, I hope this doesn't sound petty, but I really think we should stop using the term direct practice to refer to practice with individuals and families. As a community organizer and advocate, I work directly with people all the time. As an administrator, I've worked directly with people all the time. So I think we have to find another term to describe that.
Do you have any ideas, actually? I think that's a
big struggle. Well, why don't we just say practice with individuals, families, couples, and groups? I mean, okay. Second point, it's very interesting. I ask my students when I teach social policy, what is the first thing that you do after you say hello to a client? And sometimes they get it, and they say, if they're there for, let's say, for mental health work, they say they take a history. So on that point, one of the things that my own research has found is that schools of social work are teaching less and less of the history of the profession, of social welfare, and of the relationship to our society. So how can people who are educated to be practitioners where they need to understand the history of the people with whom they work, not understand the history of the context within which they're working, including, as several people, including Mark, has written about, how that history has shaped the nature of this practice, including something that we often are reluctant to acknowledge, which is, to get back to your issue of tasks, the social control function of social work, which exists concurrently with the social change function. And how do we address that seeming contradiction? Last point, and that is, from my experience at a half a dozen universities, I'm the definition of a social work professional vagabond, that generalist or advanced generalist practice is really code for working with individuals, families, and groups with a slight veneer of community practice. I have gone into agencies as a field liaison or as a research consultant in which I meet practitioners who are supposed to be teaching our first-year students a generalist model. And these are very experienced practitioners who cannot figure out a macro practice assignment for first-year students when they've been in major agencies for 20 or 30 years. Now, I'm there for 10 seconds, and I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, and I can come up with 10 assignments without even blinking an eye. So what is going on here in terms of our self-delusion of thinking that generalist practice equals this vertical integration that I think you justifiably pointed out is necessary? So I think that there are some issues that if we're going to be self-effacing, we need to acknowledge remain challenges for our field that I don't think we're addressing in a totally self-honest way. But thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Anybody want to respond? Any of the panelists want to respond?
I completely agree with your with your analysis, and I think that we have a lot of work to do. The dilemma that we tried to address, and Mary may be able to speak to this, is that all of our schools are different. So I know that in our direct practice, clinical, interpersonal practice, work with individuals, families, and groups, sequence, finding, even though it's not generalist, but finding a set of assignments that enable our graduates to develop skills at all of those levels of practice is a challenge that we've done it different ways in different times, but it's part of the curricular challenge. Do you want to say more about that as a teacher?
Not this moment.
Okay.
Can't let the opportunity go. I'm Gail Steckety, Boston University. It seems to me that one of the important things, we've had an afternoon in which we had a number of what we've commonly grouped as macro-type approaches, with the final one occupying 25% of the time being the individual families, groups, practices, that it's very important that we be clear that we are training very large numbers of students. In fact, the largest profession, as I understand it, that actually delivers those individual family group experiences for people, that these are very, very important responsibilities. They interface, obviously, with our value systems, our social justice issues, the larger societal factors that affect this, the policies, the communities that they live in, and so forth. But the importance of educating our students to provide as strong an evidence-based practice as possible cannot be understated if we are to continue to train our students to do this work, because they are the ones that are going to work with the populations in great need out there across contexts: health, mental health, housing, child welfare, whatever the context issues are. And it seems to me very important that we take this terribly seriously, despite the broader, or in the context of the broader work, but to make sure that those individual family group tasks are done, and done in the best possible way as we know it from a research perspective. So the interfaces that we've got here, it seems to me, are with our health and mental health colleagues in many contexts, as well as our broader communities, et cetera. Part of the reason I want to say that is that we are also, in a number of cases in our schools, going to be the gatekeepers for this profession. And so basing it in our research knowledge seems to me very important. I'm not exactly sure where I'm trying to go with this, but I sort of feel like I don't want the practice in this context to get short shrift. If we are educating 2/3 of our students to do this work, they must do it in the best possible way. And we are the research group that needs to help move that forward.
Thank you, Gail. Gail also was as we were all conceptualizing this conference, the person who wisely pointed out, well, we really do have to look at direct practice, clinical practice, since it is such a large part of our work. So thank you for that.
Yeah, just to make one comment through the course of the day.
Yes, I knew that was going to happen.
I completely agree with that. I guess I remember when Harry Specht and I wrote on Faithfulness, one of the questions I had, particularly with this vertical integration idea, is just focusing on mental health practice, for example, but I would say this is probably true for a variety of other things. Whether social workers actually do anything different than other professionals with similar level degrees. And I was a clinical psychologist, master's level clinical psychologist, could practice, had a credential to do that. And when we did the book, we really couldn't find much evidence, empirical evidence, people did empirical studies, that social workers doing those jobs did anything. If there was any more vertical, actually, than what people like myself were doing. That may be different now, and I admit to not reviewing that, and I'm going to take the other question after this. But as an editor of a journal, I think that's a great question, right? What is it we do that's different in any of these worlds? And folks have talked about that, I think, throughout the day, and I just want to emphasize that, including on the direct practice side. So I noticed somebody else was in line there to ask a question or make a comment. Go ahead, Beth.
I'm Beth Angel from Rutgers University. I want to thank the panel. Very interesting talk.
I just have to say, Beth was Mary's direct practice teacher.
Yes, yes. I should put in a plug that I'm proud to be the direct practice professor for one of the panelists today, from what 19 years ago. I guess I want to begin by just saying that I agree with what Gail was just talking about with respect to the need to make sure that the workforce that we're training in social work consumes the best of our evidence and really applies it in practice. And one of the most evocative phrases you used in your presentation, Mary and Jeanne, was that reading social work articles is a little bit like chewing on cardboard. And I think that Izumi was really astute in relating that to a systemic problem in academia, which is that if we were to create more palatable forms of knowledge dissemination, in the academy we're often not rewarded for doing that. And I'm wondering whether or not the panel has any thoughts about the way forward and thinking about how to create knowledge that's easily consumable by practitioners that they'll use and to create the most effective practices that they can.
That's a great question, and we tried to look at that in terms of talking about these emerging methods like practice-based research networks where practitioners are themselves engaged in the process. It's the slide for implications that said we need to address this issue of the academic reward system, unfortunately went on the cutting room floor when we were trying to keep our time down. But I was inspired in writing that originally because the last time I saw Izumi, it was at European Social Work Conference, and she was talking about her photo voce work. Do you remember that? And I mean, she really is living the kinds of new methods that are, I think, would be extremely, at least in that session, they were extremely compelling. Maybe you want to say more about that.
I think doing is not a difficult part, but creating the space to do so is not, it's not easy. So I'm sure there are deans and directors sitting in this room, and you get tremendous pressure from the university structure to get, whatever many grants, how many grants to sustain this. For example, in our school, our university has been more and more decentralized. So faculty of social work needs to raise more money, meaning the fundraising has become more important, and individual faculty members getting external grants are more important. In Canada, I'm situated in Canada now, and Canada is more, gets more social funding from, for universities. However, it's still so. It's more capitalistic, neoliberal model of university operating. So in that kind of climate, it's very difficult to create space and time for faculty members to be engaged in things that do not lead to products that lead to money or like currency in knowledge production, sort of a university structure, which is called academic industrial complex. So that I think how to do creation of different kinds of knowledges. That part I can give you different ideas. Like I can give you a workshop just now. That's not going to be difficult because there are so many exciting people doing many different exciting work. But the pity part right now is that is now extra time, extra work that people need to take on, or people after 10 years will just decide, okay, I'm gonna be assuming this, I'm gonna be non-productive faculty person, just dedicating my time to work with the community and take up this work and do this, and when I feel like it, I'll write peer-reviewed publication so that I can appease my institutional requirements. But, the kinds of work that really create the relevant knowledge and create the kinds of stuff that people can use readily might need much more time than that knowledge the university can support right away. So I think it's complex, the answers are complex, and I wish that there would be more space. And maybe department level, faculty level, school level, there could be knowledge mobilization person that can be hired. Like a social media person can help with knowledge mobilization, like write Twitter feed or write op-ed or write things like that. I think those things might be in place already, but when I was able to get help of writing op-ed from somebody, that was so helpful because I didn't know how to write op-ed, but, so like artists, I hire artists to work with me. And if there are centers or knowledge creation center to help with me with the facilitation of working with artists, that'd be helpful. I'm gonna be working on creating cartoons. Somebody said cartoons earlier. So if there's a university could have a knowledge mobilization center to sort of go, and it's like a science shop. You just drop in and brainstorm and work on that kind of stuff. And if that can be counted also as social responsibility medal or unit that you can also count as in the annual review, that would be fantastic.
Okay, let's thank Jeanne and Mary and Izumi for that.